Lawyers of Reddit. What is the detail that your client failed to bring up that completely lost you the case? Story 1. A friend of mine is a lawyer and he said that a client once turned up to court in the actual same outfit he was wearing in the burglary. When the CCTV footage came up in evidence, the client looked down to himself and was like, oh crap. Yeah, this guy was just not meant to get off with it. If he truly didn't remember, then the world just has it out for him.
We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description.
Story 2. Not a lawyer yet, but I clerked for a DA's office throughout law school. Obviously, we don't have clients, but I'll never forget this kidnapping case I worked on. It involved 2 Asian male defendants who were both the same age and looked relatively similar. Witness is on the stand and is asked to identify where the defendant who pushed an Uzi into his face is seated. It's clear the witness is having trouble differentiating the defendants. In a true moment of brilliance, one defendant raises his frickin' hand and basically points to himself like, right here, bud. Hands down the dumbest crap I'd ever seen. I thought his defense attorney was going to have a brain aneurysm. Story 3. I actually am a lawyer, but I was only watching this trial, not participating. So the case was that woman A had hit woman B in the head with a heavy beer pint at a bar, and woman B got a pretty serious injury. The defense claimed that woman A had not hit anyone with the pint, but instead had just thrown the pint into a random direction, and it happened to hit B in the head. Thus, it was an accident and not battery. Well, the prosecution had a CCTV tape from the bar and it was shown at the trial. And the tape clearly showed in HD, as A walked behind B, she smashed the pint to her head so hard that the pint shattered on impact. I looked at the defense lawyer and his jaw literally almost hit the table. The prosecutor also noticed this and asked something along the lines of, "Thrown, eh?" And the defense lawyer said that due to technical difficulties, he couldn't get the CCTV tape open on his computer when he was reviewing the evidence. Woman A was found guilty. So yeah, I was completely dumbfounded. Story 4. I'm a court-appointed attorney for qualifying individuals in family matters. Termination of parental rights case. Have been fighting to argue that parent is stable, working lawfully, and has a suitable apartment, as well as not needing psychotropic meds anymore, ready to be a parent, etc. After a few months of negotiating with all the parties and Department of Children, we have a pre-trial to try and convince guardians. I meet with my client before the hearing to see if anything changed. Nope, all good, let's get my kids. Great, that's not happening today, but let's try. We get into court. My client, who is super hot-headed and quick to anger, gets riled up and goes off on the guardians, screaming in open court. But oh, it doesn't end there. It is revealed that they are no longer working, no longer in an apartment, doesn't want to have a relationship with guardians despite her kids loving them, won't send her kids pictures of the toys they miss and can't have, plans on moving out of state, thinks they can live as a family off of state aid when she gets them back, and is 4 months pregnant, all in the matter of 15 seconds. I was too shocked to even react, just speechless. Not the image of stability and parental fitness I've been trying to paint since last July. This is honestly just the universe doing the kids a solid. OP's client seems like they were not ready to have kids, ever. Story 5. Not my client, but the son of the opposing party, and presumably the party himself, lied about being blind to make himself seem more sympathetic as a witness. We didn't know either until he took the witness box. Their counsel asked him to take the oath, and he picked up the card and read it. That was the cherry on top of a series of ridiculous events. The judge dismissed the whole thing in our client's favor shortly after. I was a trainee at the time, but my boss, who was in her late 60s then, said it was the most ridiculous case she'd ever handled. Story 6. I was involved in a hit-and-run car accident. My leg was pretty mangled, however the driver of the car was caught. Turns out he was a rich kid who was driving his mom's convertible Porsche. Denied all knowledge of hitting me, etc. At the trial, the prosecutor asked him how long he'd been driving, to which he answered, "Do you mean how long have I been driving, legally or illegally?" The judge then went nuts asking why and when he had been driving illegally. His defense team sat down in their chairs and shook their heads. Needless to say, he lost the case. Interestingly, he died a year later by drowning. He had hired a speedboat on holiday, flipped it over, and drowned. Turns out he was drunk at the time. Karma can be a jerk. Story 7. Not a lawyer. My parents had a long, messy divorce that took 2.5 years in court. My dad claimed that my mother was trying to take 100% of everything based on a settlement offer she sent him. He failed to mention to his lawyers that her initial offer, also sent to his previous lawyer, was a 60-40 split, and she only sent that 100% one in response to an equally unreasonable offer from him. As soon as she could prove that initial offer was reasonable, the judge just basically ruled on everything according to that first offer. His lawyers were so angry because they built their entire case around the idea that she was the unreasonable one. I think it was something to do with arguing that she was not sending genuine settlement offers. I'm not sure why. His goal wasn't to win, it was to prolong the battle. But the original offer exposed him in the lie in front of the judge, which made the rest of the process go very quickly. I don't get what people expect. Do they expect these things not to come up in court? Do they think they can just lie about the circumstances to their lawyers? They are trying to help you with everything they've got. Why would you lie to them? That's so stupid. This guy got what he deserved. Story 8. Not me, but my mentor. This is the reason you never ask questions that you don't already know the answer to in court. During the trial with the judge on a divorce matter, the wife brings up that her husband had abused her during the course of their marriage. Client whispers to my mentor that that is absolutely not true. On the stand, during his portion of testimony, my mentor asks, "At any point in the marriage, did you lay your hands on your wife?" "One time we were having an argument and I held her down on the couch until she stopped arguing with me." What? My mentor said it was like she could see it happening in slow motion and all the alarm bells were going off in her head. Because he had never mentioned this before and, apparently to him, this wasn't abuse. The judge gave wife a lot more money as a result and husband was just baffled. My mentor was fuming. Edit. Husband admitted that this was the only time he had laid hands on wife. My mentor was more peeved because she had thought the case was in the bag since wife had abandoned the kids with the husband to run off with her lover down in Florida, and literally only came back to the state to get the divorce done. Husband had been noted as being a great dad to the kids and a great figure in the community, hence why she was just so damn shook at her answer. Story 9. This one ended my marriage. Well, it was the start of the end of marriage. My husband lost his job in the title/mortgage business, applied for unemployment, got denied. I decided to help him with his appeal hearing. I asked him multiple times before the hearing, "Is there anything you did that caused them to fire you?" He says, "No, absolutely not. They fired him out of nowhere." Hearing day comes. He testifies under oath that he did nothing wrong, was a good employee, no issues. Upon cross-examination, the other attorney pulls out documents from one of his real estate closings. Documents he forged and backdated. Had to admit he perjured himself. Needless to say, he didn't get unemployment, and he didn't sleep at home that night. Story 10. Not a lawyer, but a woman I know received several hefty speeding fines. In my country, you can go see a magistrate to have the fines reduced if you plead poverty. She heard about this and decided to give it a shot. So she went to court and told the magistrate a sob story about not having enough money. The magistrate heard her out. Then he asked her, "Madam, what kind of car do you drive?" She replied in a tiny voice, "A Porsche." Story 11. Not me, but my dad represented a guy in a civil case. He doesn't normally do criminal law, but in this instance, the question of a forged signature came up, and his client lied saying he didn't forge it. My dad was very clear in explaining that admitting it to him wouldn't land him in jail. It would just allow him to build a better defense, but he still denied forgery. And so my dad rolled with it. He said that his case was completely cut up once it came out that yes, in fact, his client did forge the signature. Guys and gals, your lawyers aren't a snitch. Always be honest to your lawyer. Story 12. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations, etc. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction, he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. Swore up and down he'd never filed before. You can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He had personally filed for modification 6 times since he was sentenced, with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a complete waste of time and would never be considered at all. Story 13. Friend of mine is a defense attorney. He was representing a guy with a lengthy record for assault. Basically, this guy took an AC unit and threw it at his girlfriend. My buddy tells me he was able to get a plea deal for 1 year probation, no jail time. The judge is all ready to accept the deal when he asks the defendant if he had anything he would like to say. The defendant responds, "Yeah, I don't know why they're charging me with assault. I never touched her. I just threw an AC at her. This is BS. Judge rescinded the plea deal because of the defendant's attitude/lack of remorse. Went to trial and got a year in jail. Story 14. Not a lawyer, but going to law school. I worked for a defense attorney who did a lot of federal work. One of our cases was with this guy charged with trafficking of minors. We met him at the prison to interview him, and he swore up and down that he had nothing to do with this and that he didn't even know the girls. A month or so later, heaps of evidence from the U.S. Attorney's Office comes in, and it's just pages of Snapchat messages and texts between him and these girls, as well as video confessions from every co-defendant and victim saying our guy was the ringleader, as well as proof of him checking in and out of different motel rooms and whatever. We showed him the evidence and he claimed his co-defendants were conspiring against him. He continued to deny everything and wanted to go to trial, but we repeatedly told him that that would not be wise because of all the evidence against him. He ended up requesting a new attorney to be appointed, claiming that we were ineffective. To this day, my old boss and I reminisce about how difficult this client was when we catch up on the phone. Story 15. My father is a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for a severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids and so on. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table and she is bending over trying to reach it from her chair, but the pen was too far away. So she stands up, bends over and picks it up, and goes back to her seat as if nothing is out of the ordinary. My dad just stares at her, and she snaps at him like, "What are you staring at?" My dad asked her if she was okay, and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her, and then she started loudly complaining about her back and how much it hurt and no one believed her. So, what I'm learning from this thread is if you're gonna lie in court, make it consistent at the very least. Story 16. I was approached by this attorney to work for him for free to go after smugglers. This attorney showed me that this smuggler had assets, and that he had gone to the criminal trial and gotten the judge to set aside $2 million of the criminal penalties to settle his client's debts. He had receipts, invoices, all of the paperwork. He just needed associates to help him take the case to trial. He wanted me to work for free, but he would pay me on contingency once he obtained the verdict. He had 2 other attorneys working for him with the same deal. I worked on the case for a short while, but luckily moved on to other things. The other 2 attorneys worked on that case for over 2 years. At one point, they negotiated a $1.5 million settlement of all claims. The attorney in charge rejected the offer because he was convinced he could get twice as much at trial. In the end, the case settled for $200,000 because none of the clients would enter the United States to testify for fear of being arrested. The 2 associates got a whopping $8,000 apiece for 2 years of work. Story 17. A postcard. While I was in law school, I worked in a state AG office, Administrative Appeals Division. Guy was appealing a huge tax bill for unpaid tax on his dairy farm's milk production. His entire defense and claimed basis for appeal was that he had zero notice of the requirements to report production, sale, and proceeds. In initial disclosures, pile of discovery was a postcard from the state tax office when he initially registered to obtain a state tax number. Very smart AAG laid low, sprung it on the guy after he had cemented his position 50 ways to Sunday. Exploded his whole theory, resulting in big judgment. Moral: read your own discovery responses and document production before building your entire theory of the case. One piece of paper can kill your client's position. This lesson has saved my bacon in 27 years of practice for sure. Story 18. When I was a law student, I interned for a judge, where this owner of a franchise location for an international cafe company claimed the landowner/owner of the right to issue franchises in the US, happened to be the same guy, just one day locked him out. Landlord had claimed the franchise owner was selling unapproved merchandise with the company's logo on it. For 2 days, all we're hearing about is these cups the plaintiff allegedly made. Argument was that counterfeit merch violated terms of franchise and lease, which meant terminating both. Finally, the landlord is on the stand. The defense attorney pulls out a shopping bag as he's about to introduce evidence. Me and the other interns are so excited. For 2 days, we've been hearing about these frickin' cups. And suddenly, the landlord can't remember where he got the cups from. In response to one question, he says that he got them at the cafe. In another, he says the corporate office gave it to him. Since he raised doubt about the source of the cups, the judge wouldn't let them in, and we never got to see them. The defense attorney had to sadly put the bag back away into his briefcase. So yeah, lesson learned, prepare your frickin' witnesses, especially when you're trying to introduce critical evidence. Story 19. Credit card theft/fraud case. When I was a young lawyer back in the late 80s, I was trying this guy on a CC case, and the witness was the department store clerk. Before video surveillance, the state relied heavily on witness identification. As she described the customer that was purchasing the very unique clothing her store sold, I asked her how she could be so sure it was my client. She looked at my client, who was wearing the most obnoxiously yellow shirt imaginable, and said, "Because not only does he completely match the description I just gave you, but he's wearing the exact same shirt I sold him. The jury convicted him, and I learned that day to better prepare my clients for trial. Can you really prepare someone like that better for court? They showed up wearing effectively stolen merchandise, and they were being tried for stealing that merchandise. This man was just fishing for L's that day. Story 20. I wasn't a lawyer in this role, but was a law clerk. This was a typical divorce case. This particular jury trial was about splitting assets and who would get what. It was a long, drawn-out case that took about 5 days. Right before the closing arguments, the attorneys wanted to talk to the judge. It seems as though a couple of days prior, the couple decided to get back together. And instead of telling the judge and their lawyers, they just kept it a secret. We heard 4 days of evidence, argument, brought in experts such as land assessors, financial planning people, and they were like, "Oh, we're back together." One of the attorneys asked to be dismissed from the case immediately and walked out of the courtroom. The judge had to dismiss the jury, and the couple was adamant that they didn't think that them getting back together was a detail any of the attorneys needed to know. Story 21. Not my case, which is a gift from above, really. Civil trial before a jury for injuries and prop damage from an MVA, and punitive damage because defendant was intoxicated at the time of the accident. Let's call defendant DUI. Almost doesn't need to be said, but before DUI ever stepped foot in court, they would have been prepped repeatedly, first for the deposition and then for the trial testimony, with these standard questions. Were there any prior incidents, arrests/convictions, anything that can be used to impeach any of the DUI's testimony, yada yada, over hours. Denies everything and is clean as a whistle. Thus, at trial, defense counsel, DC, puts DUI on the stand to give them an opportunity to tell the jury of their contrition for this one-time error in judgment, as well as describe the difficult time DUI was going through and otherwise show themselves to the jury as an upstanding member of society in order to reduce punitive damages. It goes well. Then, plaintiff's counsel, PA, gets to cross. I'm going to paraphrase what allegedly happened next, which is purely hearsay. PA, earlier you testified that this was a one-time mistake and you've learned your lesson. Is that correct? DUI, yes. PA, isn't it true that you've already been convicted of a DUI in another state? DUI sits silently as DC immediately objects, but it's properly overruled and DUI must answer. Since what happens next is impeachment, I'll skip the objections, but suffice to say they were being fired off as rapidly as a machine gun, and just as rapidly overruled. Yes, and isn't it true that in your prior DUI, a child died? You can imagine what's happening in the courtroom and, most importantly, amongst the jury. And you think it's over. Stick a fork in DUI, it's done. But then PA goes for the jugular. Do you remember the name of that little child that you unalived while you were driving while intoxicated? In my opinion, this question is one for the ages. More powerful than the old, when did you stop beating your wife? Because no matter how you answer. Anyway, that is why you never, ever lie to your attorney. Story 22. I primarily represent plaintiffs in personal injuries cases, and oh boy, I have a few. The most memorable was probably during the hearing in this road traffic accident case. Based on all the evidence up to that point, it had seemed like a pretty clear-cut case of my client being cut off by the defendant when he decided to exit the motorway at the last minute. The defendant takes the stand and says that in the aftermath of the accident, my client's friend, who had been her passenger, said to him that she, my client, was not looking. This friend, who is Polish but has lived here for 10 years, is then giving evidence and it's put to him that he made this statement. He responds in English that, "I don't speak English, so I couldn't have said that." Our barrister just looked at me horrified. I also recently had an employment law gender discrimination case where the whole thing essentially revolved around whether they had told her that her position was being terminated as a result of genuine redundancy, legal, versus whether they terminated it after she got pregnant, obviously illegal. This distinction was emphasized to the client many, many times, and she strongly maintained that they fired her right after she applied for maternity leave without giving a reason. We're having a meeting with the client the evening before the hearing, and going through what the defendant will say, etc. We tell her they'll be claiming how they told her it was redundancy, and how is she going to respond. She replies with absolutely no hesitation, "Oh yeah, of course, that's exactly what they said." And then there's generally a shocking amount of people who genuinely completely forget what day an accident from which they supposedly sustained drastic injuries happened on.